First of all, thank you for coming. Yes, that you decided not just to join it online, but just to come in person. And thank you, everybody who joined this meeting. I'm so happy. Thank you very much for inviting me, given this opportunity to share with you something perhaps which you know, because as my colleague told you, I'm not a specialist in Semitic studies. So at some point in my life, yes, I took Arabic and I got interested in this. So in this particular presentation, which is part of my future book, I would like to share with you the material which, for example, specialists in Semitic studies would tell you, okay, nothing new about this. We know everything about this. And well, some Slavics would tell me, why are you telling us this? It's not basically about Slavic studies. So I'm right in between. So I'm trying to bridge these different, for example, perspectives on the Slavic language as it was used, for example, in the late first millennium, somewhere along the way. And I will explain why I chose, for example, this region and why this is interesting. And voila. So I will start with something which all Slavists know about this, about language conflicts and encounters of the Slavs with different speakers from different perspectives. So definitely I need to mention Boček with his latest book, which was published, if I'm not mistaken, yes, 10 years ago. The Slavs had linguistic encounters with numerous peoples. You have a list of these people, for example, from the book: Iranian, Thracian, Celtic, Alpaic, Uralic, Romance, Germanic. So we know from the history of Common Slavic or prehistory of the Slavic languages. Also, we know that the Slavs interacted with Goths. We have these dates approximately expanding to the Black Sea region and acting as mediators and spreading linguistic borrowings from a variety of tribes. And you have a list of tribes. This is almost a quote from Grenoble, 2010. This is a huge reference book, if you remember, on language contact. Yes, and she authored a chapter on Slavic linguistic contacts. And according to her, there are two language branches of Indo-European, Germanic and Iranian, as two major sources of prehistoric contact-induced changes in all Slavic proto-dialects before the Christianization of the Slavs, and so on and so on. At the same time, in 2017, Timberlake published an interesting chapter, by the way, that's in another reference book. It was published by, if I'm not mistaken, the Oxford University Press, also about prehistoric contexts, linguistic contexts. And he is quite innovative in this case. First of all, he offered, as I can treat it, a dynamic presentation of prehistoric and early historic contexts of the speakers of Slavic. So he decided just simply to give perhaps a new survey and vision of how you can treat these prehistoric and early historic contexts of different Slavic languages. So he listed, as you see from this slide, at least 5 what he calls, frontier regions where Slavs contacted with a particular languages and speakers of these languages. As you see, the southeastern frontier, Goth and the Iranians, but again, that's prehistoric context. Second one is the western frontier. He means the Romans and the descendants. Getting back to Timberlake, his perspective is dynamic. So he offered, as you see, 5 frontiers, whereas the Slavic languages contacted with different other languages. And as you see, they are chronologically different. So number 1, that's prehistoric mostly. But if you take a look at the number 5, this is about southwestern region or frontier. This is the Balkan Sprachbund. So definitely this Sprachbund appeared much later as the first frontier, so to speak. Okay, we have the western frontier, according to him, the Romans and their descendants also were in contact with the Slavic, the northern frontier. The Eastern Baltic region, definitely, that's the 12th, 13th century, perhaps even later. So that's just simply a very, very dynamic, it seems to me, vision, which is totally different from what we have in our reference books or textbooks and what Grenoble wrote. And if I double check the chat, still I cannot hear anything. I can hear well. And shall we proceed? What do you think?
Yes.
Yes.
I think it's
perhaps with the individual connection. Yes, that some can see. Okay, so in short, Grenoble says what I call her interpretation. This is about prolonged contact and yes, I think I need to fix my technical problem. That's it. So perhaps they can hear us. Okay. So Grenoble, this is about prolonged contact. And these contacts are exemplified, according to her, by contact-induced changes. That's what we, well, know that what we work basically on sometimes when we publish on contact-induced changes in different languages. According to Berlake, and this is my interpretation of his purvey, he deals with a prolonged and immediate contact. I mean, what I mean by immediate contact, you just simply, I mean, very close, tight contact, and it takes time for this type of contact. There is another possibility, and I found the case which I want to share with you when we deal about the possibility of distant and historically short-term contact of this particular case of Slavic with different languages. In this case, we speak about typologically and genealogically different languages. What I mean, the Arabic language. So what I want to tell about today from my Slavicist perspective, not as a specialist in Semitic studies, and I'm not a historian, I'm just a historian of languages, definitely. I want to tell you something about contact of Slavic with the Arabic in Muslim Spain. And again, the chronology is the same for both territories, because I also will tell you something about the contact of Slavic with Arabic in North Africa, which is well commonly called the Ifrīqīyah, which is generally the medieval Maghreb in the same time span. And I would prefer to call this type of contact ghost distant and short-term contact, because we deal only with the 2 centuries. Why ghost? And I will explain it, because we practically don't have any evidence. We have something, but unfortunately, it's not enough to make this case 100% persuasive and convincing. Well, the hypothesis is the following. So according to my perspective and to my research, there was a kind of a secretive and relexified, and I will explain it what I mean, Slavo-Arabic hybrid, which was used approximately in the late first millennium and in the 11th century. As I told you, we don't have much evidence. We have some textual products, the minimum of them, and we have something which can show to some extent that this contact existed. The markers of these Slavic slaves, and I will speak about those speakers whom we would call Slavic slaves from the early 19th century through Andalusian markets and other regions, which were transported to al-Andalus and North Africa. And I will speak also about a possible blending of this Slavic language with the local vernacular, Arabic, in al-Andalus until the fall of the Umayyad Caliphate, that's approximately in the very early 11th century, and the blending of Slavic with the Arabic in Ifrīqīyah. So, and I will give you a perspective also how we can treat these hybrid Slavo-Arabic as a secretive and relexified language as compared with the Judeo-Arabic and some other cryptic languages. from this region. Very shortly, because all historians, they know this better than I do, the interpretation of the ṣaqlabī slaves or Slavic slaves is very convoluted. The ethnic meaning of these term, Slavic slaves, is diffuse notoriously. And again, as my, for example, colleagues in the field of history told me, listen, we know about this. Why are you writing about this? No, from my perspective, this is new information, yes, about this interpretation of the ethnic meaning. Also, the term ṣaqlabī, in this particular form, this is a singular form, is used here instead of Slavic slaves. I'm using this in my presentation today instead of Slavic slaves, although we know that most of these ṣaqlabā or Slavic slaves were in fact Slavs. So it's so difficult, and you'll understand why it's so difficult to distinguish exactly who was Slav and who was German, who was from other parts of the European center, so to speak. And there were some interpretations, the most famous by Pritsak, offered in 1870, they were fair-haired slaves, and so on and so on. Then you have interpretation, the historical interpretation in the dictionary of Yatud. They were ruddy-faced, red-haired inhabitants of the northern lands. In other words, I'm not right now discussing the ethnic meaning of this. We take it at face value. Okay, they were Slavs. Some statistics. Very interesting statistic, which is, well, depends on different sources. So according, for example, to basic information we can find in some textbooks, there were some 3,750 Slavs in Madinat az-Zahra, for example, in the second part of 10th century. They were either eunuchs or they were part of the caliphal guard, something like this. And they were part of, definitely, of the ruler's harem. Then, according to al-Abadi, we have the following number. This is in red, 1,375. Then you have 6,350 women. So in total, there is a different number, as you see. But still, keep in mind that basically we deal mostly with those Slavs who were transported, and this is our historians know very well, by Jewish and Muslim slavers. And we also have some centers through which these ṣaqlabī slaves or Slavic slaves were transported to Islamic Spain and to the northern part of Africa, so slave markets in Palermo, Reggio di Calabria, and Naples, and perhaps Taranto. And always everybody mentions Verdun as the main port or entrepôt, yes, where they were castrating Slavic slaves, getting them ready to be transported further, so to speak. I will start with something which strikes you whenever you deal with information about Slavic slaves. There were some distinguished Slavs. Definitely, they did not spend all their lives, for example, as slaves. Some of them became even slave owners, potentially when they were freed by the owners. So there was a certain, for example, Habib ṣaqlabī, who was very, very active and famous in the second part of the first millennium. Then definitely we need to mention his, well, collection of poems and anecdotes in Arabic, which is also quite interesting from the point of view of the intellectual movement, which is called ṣaqlabī, when everybody would defend his self-assertion. And these Slavs also wanted to defend their identities to some extent. So the book which you see under this ballot, the second ballot, was composed in defense of a non-Arab, in this case, Slavic race. It was written in Arabic, and basically it fits into what I mentioned right now, this moment, ṣaqlabī. And basically, that's one of those few texts which tells you something about the Slavs in another context. The only surviving text written by Slavic Arabic, this is the famous Risala, and which was authored by Abu Amir ibn Garcia. From his name, you see that he was from, Garcia. So the author was a poet and secretary, was a famous, influential intellectual at that time. The fall of the caliphate in Islamic Spain resulted in the appearance of 20 small states, petty states. The historians know this very well. In the early 11th century, all these states were governed, and sorry for the typo, by Arabs, Berbers, and Slavs. But again, when I speak Slavs, I mean the ṣaqlabī slaves. I cannot distinguish exactly who was ethnic Slav or who was a German or who was perhaps from these Romance-speaking territories at some points. But I want just simply to mention several places, geographical places, which are famous, and several Slavic rulers. You just take a look at these names, who were quite active and ruled in Almeria, Badajoz, the Dinia, Majorca, Murcia, Tortosa, Valencia, and so on. Everywhere, the Slavic rulers based in this city, so to speak. The coastal city of Dinia is quite famous in this sense. It was ruled by a certain Mujahid al-Amiri, a Slavic general, who wanted to bring this splendor back to his small kingdom. And also, I would like just to mention Tortosa, because actually it was a kind of a Slavic city. Why, I will tell you later, but based on the names or laqabs of those who governed in this city, they were practically all Slavs. Take a look, for example, the first name, Muqatil al-Fatah ṣaqlabī, which is Slav, and then you have some other names which contain some connection with this Slavic origin. So they were everywhere. Cities, towns, governed by Slavs. And let's take a look at the linguistic situation, which perhaps was obtainable at that time in this part of Spain. So if there were any bilingualism, Slavic Arabic bilingualism, it was not stable. It was not balanced, to be sure. We also, in addition to the Slavic Arabic bilingualism opposition, we also had some Jewish speakers who were interacting also with some other communities, and for example, with the Christians, Mozarabs. And if you're familiar with this topic, Wasserstein is famous for his pioneering book on this part and on the languages as used in this Islamic Spain. We can see that there were stable bilingualism as compared with non-stable Arabic bilingual, Slavic Arabic bilingualism. This stable bilingualism was encompassed, so to speak, by Christian and Arabic communities. So, for example, the Mozarabs used Latin as a liturgical language. And I'm not talking right now about this martyr movement which happened with these Mozarabs. Perhaps you heard and you know, if you're a historian, about this movement in the 9th and 10th century, or 9th century. The local Arabs used classical Arabic, to be sure, as their literary language. So you have a variety of different languages and a stable and non-stable or unbalanced bilingualism. But the point is that, according to my perspective, we can deal in this case with the two subsets of the glossia in al-Andalus. So we have the first subset of the glossia, which is Latin, as opposed to Ibero-Romance language. So if you were a Mozarab, definitely you spoke Ibero-Romance, okay, you can call it a different way, yes. And you were to some extent familiar with Latin if you were a pious, at least a Christian. On the other hand, you had Andalusian Arabic, which is vernacular Arabic. And definitely, if you speak this vernacular, you cannot use it as a liturgical idiom. This is why you switch to classical Arabic. But the two subsets ultimately, in the late 10th century, it turned or morphed into another opposition, the glossic opposition, which is low Ibero-Romance as opposed to high Andalusian Arabic. The point is that the Arabs also would switch and could, according to some material and evidence, could speak Ibero-Romance, but okay, not so much. But definitely all the speakers of Ibero-Romance would speak wonderful Arabic if they wanted to survive and get all these privileges which they had. So, but unfortunately, you cannot see a place for Slavic in these different diglossy oppositions, diglossic, or where is Slavic? If you have so many Slavs, right, statistically, where are they? What languages they would speak? If you speak about the Slavic community in Andalusia, that's okay. They different speakers of different prehistorical or historical dialects of common Slavic, they would interact with each other basically without no problems. That's according to all our reference books and textbooks about common Slavic. Mostly these slaves were from the Balkan region, according to this material, and East-Central Europe. And okay, they were from Europe. Perhaps some of them were from Germany, but mostly from exclusively Slavic lands. But they were not good speakers or learners of Arabic. And according to some scholars, they say that the Slavs would make errors in the Arabic language. They were not very good speakers of Arabic to be fluent in the written variety, standard variety, so to speak. And in addition to this, they remained small, within a small, for example, communities which we can loosely identify as military, administrative elite, because some caliphs and emirs would choose some Slavic slaves to be part of the, for example, court. And unfortunately, the majority of them, as you understand, they were eunuchs and could not increase the population. So you need to replenish, yes, all these Slavic communities, otherwise they would disappear so fast. So the most famous example, I will just give you some examples of the language which could have been used at that time. So we know about Ibn Yaqub, who wrote so much about Prague and some other Slavic territories. The point is, and I took this quote from the latest publication, the latest translation of Ibn Yaqub into English, which was published in Poland last year. And this is a quote from there, take a look. So the road from muddy Ferga, okay, to the land of Buyislav, is from it, and we have these geographical names to the fort of Kalivi in 10 miles from there to Nub, and so on and so on. It's 2 miles. And there is an interesting line, the last line, speaking about the bank of the river Slava, into which the river Buda flows, according to al-Bakri, who recorded this information from Ibn Yaqub. It's an interesting verb, and I guess specialists in Semitic studies, linguistic studies, they would perhaps mention this enigmatic word. The point is that to flow in Arabic, yaqa, it's not the idiomatic expression for the Arabic language. So according to Strohmeyer, it was back in the communist Germany, he published an interesting article in which he claims that perhaps Ibn Yaqub used a Latinism, in fact, which is from Kadere. And definitely you can find lots of examples with this meaning. I just simply excerpted one to show you what Strohmeyer meant at that time. But the point is, Okay, it's easy. It's always easy to explain any borrowing from these more prestigious languages. As a true Slav, I always try to challenge this. Look at this, that Ibrahim Yakub was actually born in the Slavic city, Tortosa. And again, we don't know how many true Slavic speakers were in this city, but the city is very famous. And according to some, evidence and some suppositions, Ibn Yaqub could even pick up some Slavic language where he was born in Tortosa while interacting with some Slavic speakers. He was familiar with the Slavic culture. Otherwise, he was not chosen, for example, by the Cordoba administration to send him to East-Central Europe to gather this secretive information. In fact, he was like a spy. If you are not a speaker of Slavic, how you could be sent to, for example, these parts of Germanic Slavic territories. Why he was a spy? Because I published an article which just appeared about his spy mission. So I believe that he was kind of a secretive mission. So the point is, if he was fluent in Slavic, why he would, for example, choose the Latin cadere if he can easily choose something which he could have picked from his Slavic-speaking friends or something like this. And this is in case of a padati. The same meaning, the same idiomatic expression. So as a Strohmeyer cannot prove 100% that this is Latinist, perhaps I cannot prove it 100% that this is a Slavic form. But excuse me, we are 50-50, so we can speak and debate this. So Slavo-Arabic, which I believe existed by the 11th century, definitely, but by the end of the first millennium, as I told you, because when the Umayyad Caliphate collapsed, we have not so many information about Slavs, save for these small petty states perhaps. And as a result of this, we have a complex system, according to me, of different, for example, oppositions, which were still available at the time in terms of languages. So you have a spoken Arabic, which is used in al-Andalus. Then you have written Arabic, the standard, yes, classical Arabic. And as I believe, these Slavic towns, at least, or these petty states, they would also cherish kind of a Slavo-Arabic. How can we prove that this Slavo-Arabic existed? So we deal basically with the two periods, historical periods, for my supposition. You just take a look at some interesting information which is taken from the earliest period, so to speak. The earliest attestation in general of Slavic slaves in North Africa, going back to the Emirate Nikor Said ibn Salih. Okay. But this passage is extremely interesting. I highlighted in red something which strikes you right away. Okay, so this is Slavic slaves came to him, asked him to set them free. They wanted to be freed, man. And he told them, you are our army and slaves. So why do you ask me to set you free? They kept insisting, but he declined. And as a rule of all these debates, as you see, Said, along with his court servants and women, began to defend themselves from the attacks over these Slavs in particular, while climbing to the top of the palace, and they were defeated. After that, the common people revolted against them and chased them out to a village beyond the city known as the village of ṣaqlabī. So they basically defeated Emir, then they were defeated by this population, and they find a refuge in their village where they live. That's a colony. That's a real colony of Slavs living, for example, at this early period, during this period. It's very interesting, especially from my linguistic perspective, what language they would use in this Slavic colony. If they representatives of today's Croatia, yes, or Central Eastern part of Europe, they need just to find a kind of idiom or hybrid. So as I told you, that the question, what languages, yes, that they were used. And don't forget that, again, this statistic is very misleading because a Muslim, for example, in private households would have only one slave, according to some evidence. So if you have only one Slavic slave, this Slavic slave would not interact with anybody because he's the only one in this household where everybody speaks Arabic. So where to practice this language, how to maintain this? So the evidence is scant, but still we have an interesting pieces of evidence, which I would like to share with you. And again, my colleagues in the history of the Semitic study, they would tell me, okay, we know about this, but still perhaps not everybody here knows about this. So take a look at a certain, encounter. It's very difficult to explain who came, who was challenged, but take a look at this quote from something which would court, written evidence. This is al-Maliki, Kitab al-Riyad, it's a regular history book. So Ibn al-Banna presented clearly his views at the court and exposed the offense which was caused to him. Ibrahim raised his head, and Ibrahim, as you understand, something top level, turned to Blar al-Fatah and told him bi al-ṣaqlabī, which means in Slavic. I see that this man, he referred to this al-Banna, deserves that the qalansuwa, this is just the juridical term, of the judge, be taken off and put on his head. Then he enrolled him as a scribe for his judge, Isa ibn Miskun. So the ruler told something in Slavic. The question is why he decided to speak in Slavic. If this is his eunuch or somebody from the Arab-speaking milieu. There is a second anecdote, very famous, also specialists in Semitic and Semitic studies, they know about, but still. This is about Abu al-Abbas ibn Talb, judge of the city of Qaira 1, that is the city which exists today, yes, who was stripped of his office after falling out with the emir. So again, there is an audience which is described by a certain author, an eminent judge of the city of Ceuta, I guess in Spanish we pronounce it, Ceuta. Yeah, that's the city which exists. Who specifically referred to the aftermath of the narration. And take a look of this court astrologer. At this point, Hamdiz, who is the court astrologer, continues, again, blah, this servant stood up and walked towards me in anger to deal with me, but the emir spoke to him in Slavic, and he stopped. What the emir told him, we don't know, but it was enough to explain him clearly in Slavic. Stop, don't do this, otherwise that would be just a conflict, something which you need just to deal with later. So a couple of words about this enigmatic Blar, and the ṣaqlabī or Slavic in this particular anecdote. So what language was it? The emir used, right? Speaking to his eunuchs and to his servants. Was it a mixture of different Slavic dialects, which the ṣaqlabī slaves used according to Mission, who was publishing pioneering books, a pioneering book and several articles on this situation in general. But blah, so if you are Slavic, you definitely can agree with this major explanation. So that we deal in this case with the common Slavic liquid diphthong, right? And we have some forms like blogger, the etymological form, and then you have bolger, good, zonderwa, eigenartig, and you have different form in Bulgarian with exactly this combination, blaga, blagoi, but definitely it's not about, for example, pleonastic constructions, which we have in East Slavic. But again, we have in Polish, błoga, błogie, in Ukrainian, bolozhovka, bolochivka, and Hungarian, and so on and so on. So If you look at this form, the last cluster of two letters, it refers to at the graphical level, to the Arabic letter Rain, which reflects the underlying Arabic phoneme, which basically matches the common Slavic at the phonetic level sound G at that time. Okay, so according to all rules, Blag represents perhaps one of the names of the Slavs who were brought to North Africa, perhaps from, as you see, from the Balkans. Perhaps we can deal in this case, we can state that the Balkan origin quite compelling in this case, since even all other forms which were reconstructed by some other authors, and I will show you later, they do not prove that this is not from South Slavic. Perhaps even from the Dalmatian coast, because I want just to remind you, and the historians know better this, that the Jews and the Byzantines were actually involved in this slave trade with Dalmatia and Istria. It was so easy to bring some people from Dalmatia and Istria at that time. There is another anecdote that perhaps I will finish with anecdote, but still, there were two Slavs, a certain Qaisar and a certain Muzaffar. So Qaisar, this is like Caesar. Basically, that's in this Arabization of this form. So they were top-level servants with al-Mansur and with Emir. Al-Muzaffar was one who had taught the Emir, whose name is al-Mu'iz, calligraphy when he was young. But again, this is a quote from one source. Take a look. One day, when he was annoyed, he uttered a word in Slavic, which made al-Mu'iz suspicious. So, I mean, this slave told something in Slavic. So the Galiver, now something is wrong, the ruler told to himself. So al-Mu'iz took it upon himself to learn languages. He began with the Berber language, which he mastered. He then learned the Greek, Sudanese, one of these African languages. I don't know which exactly family. Slavic languages likewise. When he reviewed the Slavic language, he came across the particular word which was used for cursing by the slave. This rankled in his heart until he killed him. We don't know either he killed this particular slave for this, excuse me, bad word or something else. Definitely there was something else behind this, because historically the execution of Qaisar and al-Muzaffar resulted from the charge. They had abused the authority, were guilty of insubordination, who knows, perhaps bribery, whatever else. They were quite influential. So perhaps it was high time for the Emir to get rid of them. Okay, I will buy new, right? I will bring up some new servants and who would be very faithful to me. And now we are almost there with this secretive language or hybrid, which I propose. We deal with this period and which I call Slavo-Arabic. So a certain degree of secrecy was needed. Don't forget that everybody hated slaves, especially if you're at the court. Oh no, they were despised by common people, let's put it like that, by freed people, because you're very close, you're with the Emir or with some administration, and this is why the Slavic slaves were ferociously loyal to their ruler. So according to Wexler, and this is the term which I studied using, trying to find how we can apply to the situation with the Slavic language. So Wexler introduced a new term, which is Wandersprachen. So the so-called peripatetic languages, for example, for Yiddish, that's his theory, if you heard and you know about this theory. So most speakers of the secretive language, according to him, they don't care about genetic affiliation. They perhaps would deal with some kind of substratal grammars, phonologies, to the superstrated lexifier languages. So it means that all these lexicon and all this vocabulary would be, according to him, relexified, taken from another language. A secretive language presupposes its relexification, as I told you, especially the creation of a cryptic idiom. The question is if the emir would use the secretive language to communicate with his slaves, if he doesn't want that somebody else who is not Slavic slave understands him what he is telling, for example, to his slave, and vice versa. Why not? That's very interesting. So Arabs, Berbers, and some other potentially, as you see in this slide, tribal groups are to contribute to the creation of such a secretive language if you want to use it when dealing with these hated, the ṣaqlabī or the Slavic slaves. And according to this typology, for example, this type of language in Slavo-Arabic can be characterized by several typological features, which are, number one, the language should be secretive. Number two, the language should be relexified. So you don't understand me only because I'm using the vocabulary of a different language, although you can hear my phonetics, which is our phonetics, and even grammar. Then you have number three, mercantile, I will explain it, and peripatetic. So not everything so persuasive, to be sure, according to these four typological features of a secretive language, according to Wexler and some other scholars. First of all, the ṣaqlabī slaves, as you see, were brought, and I told you, not only from the Balkans, but from East-Central Europe, but also from Kievan Rus. There are some other attestations dealing with I don't remember exactly right now the name of the ruler in North Africa, but they say that one of his wives was Ruthenian. It means from Kievan Rus, perhaps, if this is the 10th century. So you have even some people from Khazaria, to be sure. And all these languages, yes, they would, or these dialects would go through Arabization, Islamization, definitely culturally speaking. But still, all these speakers may maintain some kind of communicative skills, because, as I told you, we deal with the dialects of Common Slavic. So this is the 10th century. And this Common Slavic in the state of falling apart, so to speak, but still you can perhaps navigate somehow. And don't forget that the speakers of Slavic idiom in this particular situation could borrow, could transfer, could cultivate a variety of words and expression, denoting different reality and phenomena pertaining to the everyday activities in, for example, Arabic-speaking northern part of Africa. And finally, something which it seems to me may give you general view what I mean about this Slavo-Arabic. The native Slavic idioms basically did not disappear with the time in Ifrīqīyah and al-Andalus. They just simply became another system. So even if you're eunuch, you came here, you're still alive, you are not interacting with your compatriots, so to speak, your Slavic language would not disappear. Perhaps at night you would speak to yourself, or something would be, you cannot just, as we understand, get rid of your mother tongue. No. Even if you are a spy or if you live as a eunuch somewhere else. So that system is very well compatible with those which were practiced by the Radhani merchants, according to Wexler and some other authors, in the interior of the Berber territory, among several tribes in the so-called Atlas Mountains of Morocco, and in the Judaizing communities in the northern Sahara, and possibly also in the sub-Saharan Africa. And you heard about these varieties, yes, of different mixes or hybrids, which the Radhania to some extent instigated, yes, triggered. For example, we have a variety of Iranian, blending with Iranian and Greek. You have Judeo-Arabic, Judeo-Berber, and finally you have Ladino. It's also kind of a hybrid. So they were also the Jewish, this is very interesting, the Jewish Radhaniya merchants who moved to North Africa, and they would keep the Judeo-Slavic. So according to Wexler, according to some evidence, which is very scant, but he supposes that these Jewish merchants would yet speak Judeo-Slavic. So if you're a Slav, I wonder if you understand this relexified Judeo-Slavic, or at least in general, perhaps you can find something in parallel with the hybrid used by the Jews, especially familiar with the Slavic underlying foundation, and with the Slavic which was brought by the Slavic slaves. And a couple of slides more to summarize it somehow. To what extent this Slavo-Arabic was a true secretive language. So, well, we understand that this language could be more secretive rather than peripatetic. Because you can, ideally, you can even compare, for example, some borrowings and some Arabisms or even barbarisms in this hypothetical language and in the languages of Radhaniya merchants, but as I told you, basically have no evidence of what, for example, words were used by the speaker of a Slavo-Arabic. It was accepted, what we can guarantee, it was accepted at the court of both dynasties, in chronologically speaking, because as I mentioned, these anecdotes, all these rulers would prefer speaking Slavic to the Slavic slaves. The rulers would learn this type of language or to secretly, as I told you, communicate, right? And what is more interesting, this Slavo-Arabic was more secretive. They were interested in keeping this secrecy rather than peripatetic, because if you, for example, a functionary, if you are part of regional government, it doesn't mean that if you go to another part, for example, of the state, you would use the same secretive language at the same level with those people who perhaps might not be familiar with this. So basically, everybody was interested in its secrecy rather than in spreading this. As I told you, statistically, we even do not know how many, for example, true Slavic slaves were scattered at different private households and so on and so on. And typological parallels, which may just bring and shed some light on the essence of this secretive language. So there is a certain, for example, religiolect, which is called by some authors, classical Judeo-Arabic, which was used, and it's mostly Harry published a series of articles on this language. Why, for example, this is interesting to typologically or hypostatically compare classical Judeo-Arabic with Slavo-Arabic? It seems to me that same typological features may be applied to this Slavic hybrid. First of all, we can speak about some kind of analytization of the language. For example, in Judeo-Arabic, some cases, most cases disappeared, some mood markers disappeared in this variety of the language. The idafa sometimes used some different possessive, pronouns. I wanted to double check these pronouns, but I didn't find this information in extensio, so to speak. The grammar and phonology of Judeo-Arabic was kept largely intact, and we can presuppose that the grammar, perhaps, and phonology of Slavic and Arabic phonology is not that much difficult to acquire if you speak a Slavic and vice versa, believe me. So just 4 or 5, perhaps, sounds, and so on. Basically, phonetics is easy to handle. So the bulk of the vocabulary definitely was replaced by Arabic or even by some Berber words, because they interacted also with the second rate, so to speak, loyal subjects in this city, in the states. And many Jews settled among the Berbers and acquired their language. So they were produced, and they produced kind of a Judeo-Berber variety likewise. And to almost finish this, the problem, as it seems to me, you cannot relexify the whole language. You cannot just simply take all this vocabulary from the Arabic language and appropriate it, so to speak. This process was limited because it was related only, as you understand, to your common life at the court or the administration. At the household, they were not sure because, as I told you, you were supposed to have only one slave in your private household. But they could use the Slavo-Arabic nevertheless on a regular basis, as I told you, even with their rulers. But they were not merchants, right? They were not like these Jewish or other merchants. So this is why they were not supposed to travel. So that's not was the point, for example, of the secretive language. So the peripatetic feature is less pronounced in this particular hybrid as is Slavo-Arabic. And perhaps because it's not peripatetic, you would borrow fewer words, right? So if you live, for example, at the court, that's my understanding, you would stick, okay, this is rug, this is carpet, okay, this is wine for, this is, yes, some dinars, this is here bookkeeping, that's it, right? So you perhaps don't know the variety of this life outside of the court, perhaps, and you would relexify fewer, perhaps, domains in your language. And again, before finalize it, we cannot trust the statistics. The statistic is phenomenal in some cases. Look, take a look. Only 3 cases of ṣaqlabī slaves found in the possession of private households. That's what attested. And as I told you, only 1 slave was supposed to be owned in the private households. For example, a certain judge named Abu Abbas and so on, for example, owned only 1 slaves. At least 2 ṣaqlabī slaves are reported to have been owned by a certain Abu Abdullah the Sheet. But take a look at this final, the last quote from an interesting historical record. That's about Arabid Emir who died in as you see, in 838. So he began to pack his belongings under pressure, perhaps. Precious robes, jewels, weapons, and light luggage. He arranged to meet by night with those of his entourage who were present. Each one of them departed carrying with him whatever he wanted, and he chose 1,000, as you see, slams from among his personal slaves. He placed on each of them a belt containing 1,000 dinars, fearing that the rest of his belongings would be followed. He gathered the rest of his belongings in loads. Then when the muezzin called to the evening prayer, he left Raqada, followed by successive groups of his entourage and so on. Okay, he chose 1,000 slams. Okay, that's an interesting part of statistics. But again, that might be exaggeration. We know, yes. So does it mean that he took only 1,000, ordering all other Slavic slaves be slaughtered? That was business as usual, as far as I understand. You cannot take all slaves. You make sure that they are not taken by your enemy or something like that. And then from time to time, and these historians you know better than I do, they will just simply execute several waves of the older slaves and bringing in some new blood, so to speak. And this is it. Just to repeat what I wanted to tell you, definitely Slavic and Arabic are different languages, typologically. Both are inflecting languages. In Arabic, you have 3 cases. So in Slavic, you have at least at this time 7 cases or something like this, yes. But still they have verbs, they have markers, but languages are different. And this is why major context-induced changes in Slavic would occur only or primarily in the vocabulary, rather than in the morphosyntax and phonology. Although something analytical would definitely happen, perhaps not 7 cases, they would use perhaps 3 to 4. That's kind of speculation, I understand. And the process of the formation of Slavo-Arabic which was relexified to the superimposed language, which is Arabic, was uniform despite some differences in the settings in al-Andalus and Ifrīqīyah. Not so many definitely outstanding servants at the court in al-Andalus as compared with Ifrīqīyah. In Ifrīqīyah, you had more distinguished Slavic servants. And the bulk of ṣaqlabī slaves in the region were from, I would like us to stress, is from the Balkans primarily and East-Central Europe, and but perhaps, as I mentioned, even from the furthest lands, which are Kievan roots. And the last slide. So Slavo-Arabic is a hybrid phenomenon, can be characterized by the following features. It was a secretive language, it was a relexified language, and not that much extant or peripatetic or even less mercantile language. So it means the language was not used by merchants, primarily by those who were active in the administration, perhaps who were close to those people with power and so on and so on. And some emirs and some imams, caliphs, as you see, and I gave you examples, preferred using these secretive language on some occasions. And this language they would use so that nobody would understand what they say to their most faithful, for example, servants. So that's basically, as you understand, and historians do know this better, the slaves are less engaged in this intertribal, right, fighting. They are more faithful to their owner, to the ruler. If they are not, for example, owned by some other rulers and some other tribes, they would not do this. So this is why the relationship with the ruler was very intimate, yes, and very close in this case. Unfortunately, and very interesting to explore, there's no information about the writing system. So purportedly or hypothetically, any writing system could have been used by the speakers of Slavo-Arabic. If this is a secretive language, why not to use something different from the Arabic characters, for example? So I wonder if, unfortunately, we don't have practically nothing on this, but we cannot dismiss a possibility of some kind of script which was used in al-Andalus and Ifrīqīyah, especially if you remember this mention in the Fihrist, which was published which was created in the 10th century, where the author Ibn al-Nadim mentioned the Russian letters which he came across and reproduced in his manuscript. So we don't know if these Russian letters reproduced by al-Nadim in the 10th century, in some other parts definitely of Dar al-Islam, but maybe something like this were used by those speakers of Slavo-Arabic at that time. Thank you so much. This is what I wanted, yes, to deliver today on this strange hybrid, as speculative as it might appear at some point.